Over the last 100 years or so, if you have been struggling with your weight at all, the way that you've been thinking about this is the whole calories in, calories out model. You gain weight because you ate too many calories or you didn't burn enough calories. The instrument on the left side panel is what's called a calorimeter. It's used to measure how much energy is in food. Essentially, you put a little bit of food in a test tube, put it under water and ignite it, and it burns. And the amount that it heats up the water is the amount of energy that was in that food. That's how you determine the caloric content of food. The instruments on the right are two humans riding bicycles. And if you notice, when they eat food, they're not burning. When they're cycling, there's no fires. And a lot of the assumptions that are made about that whole caloric intake, about the calories, is really wrong because of the digestive process and the metabolic processes that go into consuming and eliminating calories. Why is that important? Well, it's mostly important because if you have been struggling with your weight and thinking about calories in, calories out, then you know that the caloric density of fat is much higher than the caloric density of protein and carbohydrate. And so if you're watching your calories, then you're going to do the best job you can to avoid fat. Classic example, yogurt. Go to the grocery store and you'll see a whole wall of yogurt, and virtually every one of them is no fat. So they take the fat out and then they become almost uneatable until they add a whole bunch of sugar into it. So you can add a lot of sugar if you take out the fat because you still have a lower caloric density. Where do you have to go to get a full-fatted yogurt? Usually in the grocery store, they're found in the health food section. What do the grocers know? So the big fat lie part 2, eating fat will make you fat. So the fact of the matter is that eating fat will make you fat no more than eating tomatoes will make you red. Because in fact, fat has unique filling properties that substantially decrease hunger. Fat stays in your stomach a lot longer. So all of the foods that we eat are one of those three: fats, proteins, or carbohydrates. And if for the sake of your heart you decide that you're not going to eat fat, or if for the sake of the fact that you've been gaining weight you decide you're going to watch your calories, you'll selectively eat less fat and end up eating more carbohydrate. Well, why is that important? The effects of carbohydrates are, number one, carbohydrates will cause your blood sugars to go up just a little bit. As they do, they trigger the release of insulin. You mostly think of insulin as that thing that regulates your blood sugar. But insulin's main job is actually to regulate your body's fat. How many of you ever even thought about your body's fat as something that was regulated? You know, if you think calories in, calories out, then what you're thinking about your body's fat is that, you know, it's just the waste dump. But in fact, fat is a very well-regulated organ, and the main thing that regulates it is insulin. So what happens is that if you constantly are consuming carbohydrates, your insulin levels are always high. The insulin levels are high, and that drives energy into your fat and, to a lesser extent, into your muscles. Now, when your blood sugars normalize, your insulin levels are still too high, driving your sugars down further, and then you get hungry. But because your insulin levels are still high, the energy that you've stored is kind of locked in your fat. And so you have to eat. A couple of pretty good examples. If you eat a standard American Chinese meal, you can eat and eat and eat, and an hour later you're hungry. Why is that? All of that rice causes that insulin level to rise, causes your blood sugars to tank, and an hour later your insulin levels are still high, but the energy is locked in your fat. So if you can think about it, you're kind of like the tanker that is driving a bunch of oil to the refinery and runs out of gas. You have all of this stored energy, but you don't have any way to use it. Well, so important is this phenomenon that Time magazine chose to put butter on the front cover of their 2014 cover with the label, "Scientists labeled fat the enemy, why they were wrong." And it goes through this whole story about all of the ins and outs of the diet heart hypothesis. Bottom line, after 5 years of research, is this. If you gain weight on an American diet, and certainly if you develop type 2 diabetes on an American diet, then carbohydrates are your poison. And I'm going to leave that slide up there for a while, and I want you to kind of stare at it for a while until it burns into your retina, and hopefully it'll burn into your brain. And if you leave here tonight without knowing anything more than carbohydrates are my poison, I will have taught you a lot.